Who's there? I know you're out there! What do you want from me? Stay back!
I'm 17 and I live in Phoenix, Arizona. One of the strangest things that has ever happened to me took place during an overnight backpacking trip into the Superstition Mountains, about an hour east of the city. I won't name the exact trail. I've spent enough time outdoors to know what can happen when a good trail, an abandoned mine, or some supposedly haunted place gets posted all over the internet. People rush in, and before long there is trash, loud music, and damage everywhere. The route I chose was an 8-mile loop through a canyon. It was supposed to be a simple overnight trip. I had planned to go with a friend, but he cancelled at the last minute. My bag was already packed, the car was ready, and I had been looking forward to the trip. So I decided to go alone. I left later than I should have, then lost more time trying to navigate rough forest roads. By the time I reached the trailhead, daylight was already fading. I still had roughly 4 miles to reach the place where I had intended to camp. Anyone who backpacks knows that starting that late is a bad idea. I told myself that if I moved quickly, I could cover at least part of the distance before darkness forced me to stop. That decision left me hiking alone on a dark mountain trail, with miles of rough dirt road separating me from the nearest person. Hiking after dark can be unsettling anywhere. Out there, alone, it felt different. Eventually, the darkness became complete. I could see only the narrow cone of light from my headlamp. Everything beyond it seemed to disappear. That was when I decided I needed to stop and make camp. Because I was moving quickly and relying only on the headlamp, I chose a spot that was not ideal. It was a small clearing surrounded by tall pine trees. I found some burned pieces of wood and the remains of an old fire ring, which told me someone had camped there before, though not recently. My first priority was getting a fire started. I searched the area, gathered dry wood, and soon had flames going. Then I set up my tarp, opened a can of chili macaroni, and placed my dinner near the fire. For the first time since starting the hike, I began to relax. My camp was ready. My food was warm. The uncomfortable feeling that had followed me through the darkness started to fade. Not completely. There is always a certain tension when you camp alone in a remote place. Every sound seems louder because there is no one beside you to confirm what caused it. To understand what happened next, you need to picture the campsite. I was sitting in a small clearing surrounded by dense pines. The trail was about 30 feet to my left. A campfire creates its own little world at night. Inside the circle of light, everything feels warm and familiar. At the edge of that circle, the darkness becomes almost solid. I was sitting near the fire eating when something small landed in the campsite. A rock about the size of a marble. I stared at it. I was almost certain I was the only person on that trail. I immediately grabbed my light and aimed it toward the direction the rock seemed to have come from. The pines and brush were so thick that I could see only about 10 feet. I searched the tree line for a long time. Nothing moved. No voices, no footsteps, no second rock. I stayed close to the fire, though looking back, the fire probably gave me a false sense of safety, more than any real protection. Eventually, I convinced myself there had to be an innocent explanation. Maybe I'd kicked the rock without realizing it. Maybe it had fallen from somewhere. Maybe an animal had disturbed it. I wanted one of those explanations to be true, so I accepted it. I eventually went to sleep. I had no idea how much worse the night was about to become. I woke to the faint sound of leaves moving. It was quiet enough that I might not have noticed if everything around me had not been so still. I listened. The rustling seemed to drift farther away. Still half asleep, I reached for the handheld flashlight I had left beside me before falling asleep. My hand found nothing. I searched again. The more I looked, the more awake I became. The flashlight was gone. I pushed myself up, crawled from beneath the tarp, and looked around. Then I saw light in the woods, not far away, maybe 15 feet beyond the edge of camp. My flashlight was lying in a pile of leaves. I froze. I knew where I had left it. It had been right beside me. Now it was outside the campsite, past the tree line. Someone or something had moved it. I shoved my boots on as quickly as I could. In one hand, I held my knife. My head kept turning in every direction. I tried to decide what to do. I could stay at camp and wait for daylight, or I could try to hike roughly 3 miles back to the car in complete darkness. The thought of being on the trail without reliable light terrified me. Whatever was out there already seemed to have the advantage. So I stayed. Eventually I heard it again. Footsteps. Someone walking through the forest. Slowly. Casually. Not running. Not stumbling. It sounded like a person taking an easy walk, as though being alone in those mountains at night was perfectly normal. Sometimes the footsteps moved so far away that I could no longer hear them. Then after a while they returned, again and again. The sound circled the area for what felt like hours. My fire grew smaller. I had nearly used all the wood I had collected. Then the footsteps came closer, closer, until they seemed to stop only a few feet beyond the edge of the weak firelight. Everything went silent. I sat completely still. My knife was locked in my hand so tightly that my fingers hurt. I listened for breathing, movement, a branch snapping, anything. Nothing came. I stayed that way until the sky finally began to brighten enough for me to see the clearing. I was alone. At least I appeared to be. I packed my gear as fast as I could. Then I walked quickly back down the trail. When I reached the empty dirt road and saw my car, I almost ran. I unlocked my Subaru, threw everything inside, and drove. I did not stop until I had put many miles between myself and that campsite. Eventually, I pulled into a gas station in Apache Junction. I bought an energy drink. But honestly, I mostly wanted to see another human being. I wanted bright lights, voices, normal life. When I walked back toward my car, I noticed something written in the dust on the rear window. 2 words, sleep well. I just stood there staring. Someone had been close enough to my vehicle to write that message. Maybe while I was on the trail. Maybe while I was asleep. Maybe while I sat beside the dying fire listening to those footsteps. I've had plenty of strange experiences during adventures around Arizona. Nothing has frightened me like that night. I don't know who was in those mountains, but I believe someone was watching me, and whoever it was knew exactly how scared I was. Another story happened when I was 14, on private family land in western Maryland. My mother's relatives had small cabins scattered around the area, and almost everyone on that mountain was related to us somehow. We grew up spending summers there. Campfires, scary stories, cousins running everywhere. It felt like one of the safest places in the world because it belonged to family. The layout is important. Imagine a road shaped like a large capital letter T. Beyond the upper part of that road, not far away, ran the Savage River. If you went left, the road passed several family homes before disappearing into dense forest. If you went all the way right, you eventually reached my mother's tiny cabin. I often wandered off alone. I liked it that way. One afternoon, my aunt asked to come with me. She was much older than I was. Tall, covered in tattoos, with bright pink hair. She was not the kind of person who seemed easily intimidated. I decided we would head left, toward the thick forest. She agreed. Part of the reason she came was that she wanted to smoke marijuana somewhere my grandmother would not see her. She offered me some. I refused. I was a cautious kid, and the idea of drugs scared me. At the end of the road, a rough dirt path entered the woods. The river ran nearby. If you walked toward it, the ground sloped downward. Farther into the forest, there was even one of those strange old staircases that seemed to lead nowhere. That day, I followed the path then moved closer to the river. I watched fish and crawdads in the water, while my aunt stayed a short distance behind me. I was completely absorbed in what I was doing when I heard a click, a mechanical sound. I looked up. Across the river stood a man I had never seen before. He was close, maybe 15 feet away. He seemed to have stepped out from the trees on the opposite bank. It was warm outside, but he wore a black jacket and ragged jeans. He held an old yellow film camera, the kind where you had to manually advance the film before taking another photograph. I stared at him. In all the years I had visited that property, I had never seen a stranger in that part of the woods. The man smiled. He looked to be somewhere in his 40s, scruffy, tall, thin. He lowered the camera slightly, then stepped forward. I stepped back. He advanced the film, then raised the camera toward me again. I could not think of anything to say. I backed away another step and nearly slipped on a rock. Then my aunt came stumbling through the trees behind me, talking in the middle of a sentence. She stopped when she saw the man. I turned toward her. I must have looked terrified. When I looked back across the river, the man was not focused on my aunt. He was staring at me. He raised the camera. Click! Then he did something that changed the entire situation. He lifted one hand, slowly wagged a finger, then pointed toward what looked like a knife sheath attached to his hip. After that, he drew one finger across his throat. I did not think. I reacted. I spun around, grabbed my aunt, and ran. My heart felt like it was trying to tear out of my chest. As we pushed through the trees, I thought I heard one more camera click. Then I heard splashing behind us. The river could be deep in some places, but where we had been standing, the water was shallow enough for a grown man to cross. That realization made me run harder. We climbed through the woods blindly. When we reached the strange stairs, my aunt pulled me behind them. We dropped low and tried to breathe. I was wheezing so loudly that I covered my mouth. The trees were too dense to see the river from where we hid. But even over my heartbeat, I could hear branches snapping. Something was moving through the forest. Fast. That was when real panic set in. The route back to the family property was not a straight path. You had to weave around rocks and trees. The ground rose and dipped. There were places where one wrong step could twist an ankle. There were snakes in the area too, which normally made us walk carefully. Now none of that mattered. I was crying. My arms and legs were already cut from branches. We still had miles to go. Neither of us had a weapon. Hiding behind the stairs was making the fear worse. My aunt finally grabbed me and pulled me toward the direction of the road. We ran. I made it about another mile before my foot caught on a branch. I fell forward and slammed headfirst into a tree. I dropped to the ground. I tasted blood. I had bitten through my lip. My head rang. My aunt ran back to me. She crouched down, whispering that we had to keep moving. I was shaking so badly that standing felt impossible. We were still far from an occupied cabin. I kept looking behind us. I saw nothing. That did not make me feel safer. My aunt decided we could not stay. She pulled me up. Half dragging me, she forced me forward. The rest of the escape is mostly a blur. We finally broke out of the woods. Not many relatives were around that day. We kept going until we reached my grandmother's cabin. I ran inside crying. People rarely locked doors there. My grandmother looked at me, then at my aunt. Both of us were cut up and terrified. She called for my grandfather. He listened to what happened, grabbed his rifle, and immediately began organizing the family. My aunt told most of the story because I could barely speak. She left out the part about smoking marijuana. My grandfather and grandmother went cabin to cabin. The men gathered firearms. The women and children were warned to stay close. There was little or no phone service on the mountain, and law enforcement would have taken a long time to reach us. Darkness was approaching. The roads were steep, winding, and dangerous at night. Eventually, my mother arrived. She looked at my aunt, then she looked at me, and she decided we were overreacting. She suggested I had probably smoked with my aunt and become paranoid. She said maybe the stranger had been a fisherman trespassing on the property. Maybe we had startled him as much as he startled us. Maybe I had imagined the camera. Maybe I had imagined being chased. My aunt exploded. She told my mother I was a good kid. She insisted I had not used anything. She swore we were telling the truth. They began yelling at each other until my grandmother forced them to stop. The men searched the woods. They found no sign of the stranger. No camp, no camera, no obvious tracks, nothing. That night, for the first time in a very long time, people on the mountain locked their doors. I still think about that man. Sometimes I wonder whether photographs of me are sitting in some private collection somewhere. It is a disturbing thought, but there is another thought that bothers me more. I usually wandered those woods alone. If my aunt had not decided to come with me that day, I do not know what would have happened. Maybe being photographed was the worst thing that happened to me. Considering what might have happened, I can live with that. Another camping trip nearly killed me because of something much simpler. A hidden trap in the ground. An old friend invited me camping. I had not been in years, so I agreed. I was excited enough that I barely slept before the trip. He picked me up early and we drove a long distance to the park. I slept a little in the car and felt better when we arrived. Then my friend told me the campsite was still a long hike away. I tried to convince him to choose something closer. He promised the place would be worth the effort, so I followed him. The first part was manageable. A lot of the trail went downhill. As time passed, though, exhaustion caught up with me. We took a break, then started again. The second part involved much more climbing. I became sluggish and stopped paying close attention to where I placed my feet. We reached a flatter section. I felt relieved. My friend was walking ahead of me. Somehow, he stepped past the trap. I did not. One moment I was walking. The next, the ground vanished. I fell into a deep hole. The impact at the bottom shocked me awake. Adrenaline hid some of the pain at first. I tried to stand. My right leg collapsed. Then I fell against a sharpened wooden stake. There were several stakes in the bottom of the pit. Thankfully, most had fallen over or broken. When I looked at my lower leg, I could see how badly I was injured. I will not describe it in graphic detail. The bone was clearly broken. A wooden stake had also pierced my leg. Without thinking, I pulled it free. The pain nearly made me vomit. I looked upward. All I could see was blue sky framed by trees. The pit seemed at least 10 feet deep. Someone had spent serious time digging it. I yelled for my friend. His face appeared over the edge. At first he laughed because he thought I had simply fallen. Then I told him how badly I was hurt. The laughter disappeared. He panicked. He said it looked like poachers had dug some kind of illegal animal trap. At first, we thought he could reach down and pull me out. He could not. Then he tried lowering a tree limb. I managed to grab it. But when I tried to put weight on my injured leg, the pain was unbearable. It was obvious I would not be climbing out without help. Luckily, there was still plenty of daylight. I tried to stay calm. My friend was pacing above me, clearly terrified. I told him to go get help. A ranger station was a little more than an hour back the way we had come. He could reach it, get rescue personnel, return before night. He finally left. Then I was alone in the pit, with pain, silence, and nothing else to think about. The pain began coming in waves. Nausea followed. I considered trying to make a splint. The moment I tightened anything around the injury, I nearly passed out. I decided leaving it alone was safer. I put my head down and waited for the dizziness to fade. Eventually, it did. I tried singing to distract myself. That worked for a while. Then I heard thunder. I looked up. The sky above the hole was getting darker. I remember thinking that getting a little wet would not kill me. That was a terrible assumption. Rain began lightly. Then it intensified. Soon it was coming down hard. Water started collecting in the pit. At first, I did not understand the danger. Then I noticed my boots were submerged. The hole had become a container. I clawed at the walls and forced myself upright as best I could. I began praying for the rain to stop. The water climbed, slowly, then faster. My injured leg screamed every time I moved. The storm eased for a while. I thought it was ending. The water was still low enough that I believed rescue would arrive long before it became dangerous. Then the rain returned, harder. The one strange benefit was that fear of drowning distracted me from the pain in my leg. I tried to think positively. Jokes, movies, anything. But every few minutes, I looked at the water. It kept rising. When rescuers finally arrived, The storm had nearly stopped. The water was just below my waist. Ropes came down. Voices called instructions. They lifted me out. The feeling of leaving that hole is difficult to describe. I had spent hours imagining the possibility of drowning in a small pit in the middle of nowhere. Once I was safely out, everything else moved quickly. I was taken to a hospital. Surgery repaired my leg with plates and screws. Then came weeks on crutches. It was miserable, but I was alive. We never made up for that ruined camping trip. Years later, though, I took my own children camping a few times. Every time I step onto a trail, I watch the ground more carefully than most people probably do. Maybe I should call that old friend again. We have not seen each other in a long time. A camping trip might be a good way to catch up. I would just make sure I kept my eyes open. My childhood was not good. My parents did not spend every day physically hurting me, though there was some of that. Most of the time, they simply ignored me. Both drank heavily. My mother worked part-time and claimed it was so she could be home for me. In reality, most of her free hours disappeared into alcohol or sleep. My father drove long-haul trucks. He earned most of the money. He was gone constantly. That left me alone. Our apartment sat near the edge of town, surrounded by miles of forest. From the time I was very young, I was fascinated by those woods. I started exploring them. Then I started spending entire days there. Eventually, I realized something painful. My parents barely noticed when I came and went, so I began camping overnight. At first, I did it as a test. I wanted to know whether anyone would miss me. No one did. That gave me freedom. But it also confirmed something I did not want to admit. I was mostly raising myself. Soon, I was spending long stretches in the forest. I created small camps in different places. The woods became more of a home to me than our apartment. Eventually, my father caught me coming out of the trees early one morning before school. He had just returned from a trip. Seeing his 12-year-old son walking out of the forest enraged him. I was punished. Both parents yelled. For a short time, they watched me more closely. It did not last. Once my father left for work again, and my mother returned to drinking, I went back to the woods. I slipped out after she passed out, then returned before school. Soon, everything was exactly as before. If I was not in class, I was somewhere among the trees. I was not the only person using the forest. There were groups of homeless people who camped there. Some drank heavily, some used drugs, some fought. I once stayed too long near one group and was almost attacked. After that, I moved my camps to the far side of the river. I knew a place where I could cross. Most of them did not. From the shadows, I sometimes watched their camps. Arguments, drinking, fights. It reminded me too much of home. That made me resent them. As the weather grew warmer, more people appeared in the forest. Their camps spread. For a while, the river still protected my side. Then one afternoon, that illusion ended. I had gone down to collect water. I heard voices across the river. I stayed alert. After filling my container, I started back toward camp. Then I heard arguing. Curiosity got the better of me. I hid and watched. Across the river was a ragged tent. 3 men and 1 woman stood near it. They were shouting. From the way they moved, they seemed intoxicated. I could not understand most of what they were saying. Then one man struck another with a bottle. The victim fell. He did not get back up. The attacker picked up a large rock, then brought it down on the fallen man. Again. I remember forcing myself not to scream. I was too frightened to move. The woman shouted something at the attacker and hit him in the chest. He barely reacted. He just stared down at the man on the ground. Then the group ran away together. I stayed hidden. I was terrified they might return. Time passed. Eventually, I convinced myself they were gone. Part of me expected the injured man to stand up. Looking back, that was a child's hope. I knew he needed help. Whatever I thought of the people camping there, he was still a human being. So I ran. I covered the miles back to our apartment as fast as I could. When I arrived, I was actually relieved to see my father home. I rushed inside. Both parents were sitting on the couch. I tried to explain what I had witnessed. Instead of calling police, my father became furious that I had disobeyed him by going back into the woods. My mother slurring from alcohol, joined him. Then she accused me of making the story up for attention. I insisted it was true. They did not listen. My father punished me again. The conversation was over. The man in the woods was not getting help. I was just a kid, and the adults who were supposed to protect me had decided my words did not matter. I went to my room. I cried myself to sleep. After that, I was forbidden from going outside alone. Eventually, I was sent away because my parents claimed I was too difficult to handle. I expected the next home to be worse. Instead, I met the man who changed my life. Grandpa Elias was patient, kind, everything my parents were not. The first time he asked what I liked to do, I did not know how to answer. No adult had ever cared enough to ask. Finally, I told him I loved nature. I expected him to laugh. His face lit up. He spent a long time telling me about camping with his own father. That was the moment I realized my life might be different. When the weather warmed, camper, explored parks. He taught me more about the outdoors than I could ever write down. Even when he became too old to join me, I continued visiting him and sharing stories from my adventures. His body weakened with age. His mind remained sharp. I owe him more than I can ever repay. And he never asked for anything in return. He loved me. That was all. It took me years before I finally told Grandpa Elias about the killing I had witnessed. I also told him about the guilt. I had carried it for so long. I kept thinking that maybe I should have done more. Maybe the man could have been saved. Maybe the killers had escaped because I was afraid. Grandpa Elias listened. Then he hugged me. When he finally let go, I asked what I should do. He told me to contact police in my old hometown. Tell them everything I remembered. After that, he said, the responsibility belonged to the adults whose job it was to investigate, not to the frightened child I had been. So I called, and something changed inside me. For the first time, I understood that I had done what I could back then. I had run home. I had told my parents. They were the ones who failed to act. The guilt was not mine. Later, after I went away to college and returned home for a holiday, Grandpa Elias told me investigators had identified the people involved. Most were already dead. The woman from the group was still alive. She helped detectives locate the victims' remains. Police thanked me for finally coming forward. My information helped close a case that had remained unsolved for years. After that, I moved on. For a long time, I barely thought about that part of my childhood. Then my father's death brought old memories back. By then, my life had become something the lonely boy in that apartment could never have imagined. My love for forests and wildlife became my career. Now I travel. I help discover and protect wild places. I spend my life around the same kind of nature that once gave me shelter when home did not feel safe. None of that would have happened without Grandpa Elias. His love did not erase what happened to me. It did something more important. It showed me that what happened did not have to decide who I became. Another camping memory begins with my father insisting that he would never willingly stay in a national park. He believed national parks were crowded with tourists and recreational vehicles. He considered himself old school. That description was generous. If a piece of camping equipment was made from anything other than canvas or leather, he distrusted it. My mother tried to introduce modern nylon tents. He refused. He preferred hauling an enormous musty wall tent everywhere. He brought kerosene cans that seemed to leak onto everything we owned. He camped like a man born into the wrong century. For years, the rest of us suffered through his definition of roughing it. Then my younger brother was nearly killed. That changed everything. My father often took us into a national forest during hunting season. The weather was usually cool but pleasant. The woods smelled like pine. Gunshots in the distance were common. Dad had hunted when he was younger. Though, after marrying my mother, he stopped. I sometimes wondered whether camping during hunting season was his way of staying close to it. My brother Bryce and I were allowed to wander the woods with very little supervision. That seemed normal at the time. Looking back, the idea of sending two young boys into a forest full of hunters seems unbelievable. But our parents had grown up with the same freedom. We left camp in the morning, returned for food, then disappeared into the trees again. We loved pretending we were soldiers. We wore camouflage, ran through brush, crawled through leaves. Bryce had recently received a pair of toy walkie-talkies. They were cheap. We thought they were incredible. One afternoon, we went back into the woods after eating. I was sitting on a fallen tree. Bryce was trying to sneak up on me. Then I heard a loud gunshot. A split second later, something whistled past my head. I dropped flat. Instinct told me not to move. Then I heard a faint sound in the distance. A moan. Bryce was nowhere in sight. I called him on the walkie-talkie. No answer. Then I heard something that sounded like my name. I called again. Nothing. Fear began building. I shouted his name. I told him the game was over. He needed to answer. I listened. Only leaves. Then another faint moan. I moved toward the sound. Stopped. Listened. Heard rustling. I moved again. Then dropped low and looked beneath the brush. I saw the bottom of a sneaker. Bryce's sneaker. I rushed over. He was lying under the bushes. His eyes were wide with terror. There was a gunshot wound beneath his arm. Blood was soaking his clothing. I was terrified, but I tried not to show it. I did not want him to become more frightened. I was too young to understand how carefully an injured person should be moved. I picked him up. He was too heavy for me. I carried him as far as I could. Eventually, I had to put him down. His voice was weak. He told me to leave him and get help. That almost broke me. I wanted to cry. Instead, I ran. I ran through the woods without stopping. When I reached camp, my mother took one look at me and knew something was wrong. She yelled for Dad. He came out of the tent. He looked at my face and asked one question. "How bad is it?" I could barely breathe. I pointed. He ran. By the time I caught up, Dad was already lifting Bryce. We rushed toward the car. On the drive to the hospital, Mom kept talking to him, telling him to stay awake, telling him he was going to be okay. I sat in the back pressing my shirt against the wound. The normal drive should have taken much longer. Dad made it in far less time. Doctors took Bryce immediately. He went into surgery. We waited for hours. I remember being amazed by how calm my parents seemed. Now that I'm a parent myself, I understand they were probably anything but calm. They simply refused to fall apart in front of us. Eventually, a doctor came out. Bryce had nearly died. His condition had become critical during surgery more than once. But he survived, and doctors believed he had a good chance of recovering. Police came to speak with us. Once the emergency had passed, I finally broke down. While telling the story, I realized something I had not fully understood before. That bullet had passed close to me too. I could have been the one lying beneath the bushes. Bryce stayed in the hospital for a while. My parents rented a hotel room nearby. Detectives investigated. No suspect was ever definitively identified. The leading theory was that an illegal hunter had mistaken movement in the brush for a deer and fired without confirming the target. Sadly, accidents like that have happened before. Bryce was one of the lucky ones. He recovered. He grew up, built a business, started a family, and lived an ordinary life. Something good came from the tragedy. My father finally reconsidered his hatred of national parks. He decided that all those tourists and recreational vehicles might actually make a safer environment for his family. After that, our camping trips changed. We visited incredible places. Yosemite, the Grand Canyon, places where camping felt peaceful instead of reckless. That was always what I had wanted, and I am almost certain Bryce would agree. Another trip began as a simple idea between brothers. I don't remember who suggested it first. By the end of the day, the destination had been chosen and the plans were made. I had camped plenty of times before. My two brothers, Wyatt and Cole, had not. They came into our family later in life. My biological father, the person who truly loved camping, had already passed away by then. My stepfather was a good man, but the outdoors was never really his thing. So I took responsibility for the trip. We made a supply list: food, tent, cooking gear, water, and perhaps, most importantly to my brothers, several cases of beer. We packed everything and drove out the next morning. At the time, none of us understood how that weekend would permanently change the way we saw one another. The drive was quiet and uneventful. When we reached the area, I was relieved to see that the weather had been dry. Starting a fire was not impossible for me, but I did not consider myself an expert. Wyatt and Cole had even less experience. I had brought lighter fluid just in case. I never needed it while I gathered wood and built the fire. My brothers tried to assemble the tent using what they remembered from online videos. I had purposely bought one of the easiest tents I could find. It still took them forever. By the time they finally finished, the fire was roaring. I had potatoes buried in the coals. Steaks were ready. I was already drinking my second beer. The meal turned out great. By nightfall, we were sitting around the fire, eating and laughing. Then the real party started. I had chosen a remote campsite on purpose. I knew the three of us would become loud after drinking. I also liked large fires and music. I did not want to disturb strangers. That first night was exactly what I had hoped for. We drank, laughed, told stories, played music. We stayed awake until exhaustion finally took over. When I woke the next day, the sun was already high. Wyatt and Cole were sitting near the dead fire. Both had beers in their hands. I asked why the fire was out. Wyatt admitted they had tried to relight it and failed. I laughed, then walked to the tree line, collected wood, placed it over the coals, and blew gently. The coals brightened. Within minutes, flames returned. The expressions on their faces were priceless. They looked at me as though I had performed magic. I fetched water from a creek, made coffee, cooked eggs and potatoes. After eating, I felt human again. I suggested fishing. We spent most of the day near the water. Nobody caught anything worth keeping, but Wyatt managed to get a good head start on drinking. We returned to camp near evening. I cooked the remaining steak. Then we worked on finishing what was left of the beer. The second night was quieter. I did not build a large fire because I knew we would be leaving soon. And I wanted to make sure the coals could be completely extinguished before we left. We mostly sat around talking. Work, women, family, nothing important. Eventually, we decided to sleep. The last thing I clearly remember was Wyatt trying to climb out of his sleeping bag because he needed to urinate. He had drunk much more than Cole and I had. He fell more than once. Eventually, he made it out of the tent. I must have fallen asleep almost immediately afterward. The next thing I remember is waking with sunlight coming through the trees. I desperately needed to use the bathroom. I moved toward the tent zipper as quietly as I could so I would not wake the others. When I opened it, a strange smell entered. Burned meat. That was the closest comparison my mind could make. I assumed one of my brothers had gotten up early and ruined breakfast. I looked behind me. Cole was still asleep. That meant Wyatt had to be outside. I crawled out already, preparing some sarcastic comment about his cooking. Then I saw the fire. It was dead, and Wyatt was nowhere obvious. The morning light was still dim enough that I could not immediately understand the shape lying across one side of the cold coals. I walked closer. The smell became overwhelming. Then my mind finally recognized what my eyes were seeing. It was Wyatt. He was lying face down across the remains of the fire. He was not moving. I rushed forward. Without thinking, I rolled him over. I will not describe what I saw in detail. The fire had badly burned him. The reality hit me all at once. I started screaming for Cole. He did not respond immediately. I ran into the tent, shook him. He groaned and tried to push me away. Then I shouted that Wyatt was dead. Cole sat upright. He asked me to repeat myself. I could not. I pointed outside. He rushed from the tent, then stopped when he saw our brother. Cole dropped to his knees. The sound he made was one of the worst sounds I have ever heard. Not a normal cry. A deep, broken wail. I stood behind him with my eyes closed. The smell was everywhere. The morning air was cold. At some point I realized I had urinated on myself. I did not care. I did not want to look again. That was not how I wanted to remember Wyatt. I eventually crawled back into the tent and cried. I have no idea how long we stayed like that before I finally understood that someone needed to call emergency services. Responders arrived after a long wait. The coroner removed Wyatt's body. Only then did I feel able to come out again. Cole spoke with one of the officers. The smell still hung in the campsite. I became sick and retreated to the tent. Another officer eventually joined me inside. He asked about the trip, what we drank, what we ate, what happened during the evening. I answered everything I could remember. After the authorities left, Cole and I began taking down camp. We worked silently. I moved quickly because I could not stand being there. Looking back, I understand that my behavior may have seemed cold. I was not trying to act uncaring. I was the oldest. Someone had to notify the family. I knew our mother would be destroyed. I wanted her to hear from me before she heard from anyone else. Grief does strange things to people. There is no correct way to react when someone you love dies suddenly. Cole cried openly. I went quiet. Neither response meant we loved Wyatt, more or less. Telling our mother was exactly as terrible as I imagined. She had always wanted a large family. After my biological father died, she thought that dream had ended. Then she met my stepfather. He suggested adoption. That changed everything. Wyatt and Cole were biological brothers, close in age, when my mother found them. Older boys are often harder to place with families. She loved them immediately. From the moment they joined us, I considered them my brothers. Not adopted brothers, not stepbrothers, brothers. For a while after Wyatt died, Cole and I stayed close to Mom. We knew how deeply she was grieving. Then something changed. I began noticing the way Cole looked at me. Questions in his eyes. Suspicion. He did not accuse me directly. Not at first. But as the investigation continued, strange details appeared. I had assumed Wyatt had passed out near the fire. Maybe he tripped. Maybe he fell. He had been much more intoxicated than either of us. But the medical examiner documented bruises across his back. Wyatt played rugby and often had bruises. So that detail had an innocent explanation. There was also a fracture in his skull. That sounded frightening. Doctors explained that severe heat can sometimes cause bone damage after death. Still, Cole could not let the suspicion go. He began convincing himself I had something to do with Wyatt's death. The harder I tried to pull us together, the more distant he became. The painful truth is that I had my own questions about Cole. I had seen Wyatt and Cole arguing before the trip, more than once. Whenever I entered the room, they stopped. I never learned what those arguments were about. So yes, I have suspicions too. But suspicion is not proof, and our mother had already lost one son. I could not bear the thought of destroying what remained of the family without knowing the truth. For now, I want to bring us back together. For Mom, for Wyatt, but privately, I will keep looking. If there was something between my brothers that somehow led to Wyatt's death, I need to know. Even if the answer is terrible. He was my brother too, and he deserves the truth. Another place that shaped my life was a summer camp in the northeastern United States. The camp operated during the warmest part of the year. Campers and staff arrived at the beginning of each week and stayed overnight until the end of the session. The property was enormous. Cabins everywhere, a huge dining hall, activity buildings, supply sheds, open fields, forest, a fishing pond, a beautiful ravine lined with shale and wildlife. A long driveway separated the property from main roads. Once you entered camp, the outside world felt very far away. Campers were not allowed personal electronics. Staff had limited access during breaks. There were no personal cars moving around. Communication across the property often depended on walkie-talkies. I attended that camp as a child for many summers. Later, I returned as staff. I loved the place deeply. But anyone who worked there long enough learned something else. The camp had stories. Paranormal stories. A lot of them. I could probably fill a book with everything I heard. Some stories were funny. Some could be explained. Others still give me chills. Most of the strangest experiences happened when I was a counselor and young staff member. The campers themselves rarely seemed to encounter anything. I do not know why. As a child, my memories of the camp were almost entirely happy. Nothing frightened me. Nothing felt wrong. As a young adult working there, that changed. Certain things happened repeatedly. During staff training or after campers had gone to sleep, counselors sometimes lay outside the dining hall and looked at the stars. The view was incredible. The recreational field stretched toward the hills. On clear nights, the sky looked enormous. We often saw strange lights, quick flashes moving in irregular patterns, unexpected streaks like meteor activity, even when none had been predicted. Sometimes red flickering objects appeared in places where planets should not have been. I had friends who knew astronomy well. Watching their faces confused me more than the lights themselves. They would stare, check the sky, try to explain, then admit they could not. There were usually many witnesses. The lights would appear one night, then never return to the same place. Nightmares were also common among staff. Counselors dreamed about figures standing in cabin corners, shapes at the foot of bunks. I had those dreams almost every year after my first season. I would wake sweating. The cabin would be quiet. Campers asleep. Nothing there. At night, people sometimes heard screams or distant voices carried by wind from the direction of the pond. Footsteps circled buildings when everyone was supposed to be in bed. Objects disappeared, then reappeared in impossible places. Doors secured with heavy padlocks were found open. Some counselors were accidentally locked inside buildings, even though no one had been nearby to lock them in. People arrived skeptical. Some left believing. Returning staff learned to accept that the camp had a strange side. We warned newcomers. We joked about it because joking made it easier, but we respected it. One of my earliest memories, connected to the camp's paranormal reputation, involved an old gravestone. When I was growing up, a single flat stone lay on a hill near the pool, just outside the area where girls slept. It was ancient. The name could no longer be read. The dates had worn away, but the shape and formatting made it obvious that it had once marked a grave. Nobody could tell me who was buried there. Most people simply said the stone had always existed. When I returned as a first-year counselor, there was already gossip about strange activity around camp. Older staff knew stories they would not share with the youngest counselors. By the end of that season, the gravestone was gone. Staff were discouraged from discussing it, especially around campers. I remember thinking something obvious. Removing a marker does not remove a grave. If someone was buried beneath that hill, they were still there. Maybe camp leadership hoped removing the stone would reduce rumors. If so, it did not work. During training, older counselors began telling us famous camp ghost stories. At our camp, staff used special counselor names. For this story, I will use different versions of those camp names. One older counselor, Circuit, told us about two famous ghosts. The first was supposedly a young boy. According to the story, he had once chased a ball near the road beside camp and been struck by a vehicle. Now, his shadow could sometimes be seen running across the recreational field beneath the streetlights. The second legend involved a woman in white. A few houses stood beyond the road. On certain nights, people claimed a woman in a long white dress could be seen standing silently on one porch. She would face the camp all night, then disappear before morning. As first-year counselors, we were terrified. It was late. We were sitting beneath pavilion lights near the field and road. The older staff knew exactly how to scare us. Then one counselor named Flint decided to help. Flint became one of my closest friends. He could see I was genuinely frightened. Later, he walked with me to the top of a hill overlooking the field. From there, he showed me the truth behind the first legend. A streetlight cast a long shadow across the grass. Attached to one pole was an electrical box. The angle of the light created a silhouette that looked exactly like a small child frozen mid-step. Once you saw it, the illusion was incredible. No wonder people thought it was a ghost. Then Flint pointed toward one of the nearby porches. The woman in white was there. For a moment, I nearly panicked. Then he explained. It was a large American flag. In moonlight, the colors disappeared. The fabric looked pale. The breeze made it move slowly around the pole like a dress. I laughed with relief. Flint did not. He told me those two stories had simple explanations. That did not mean everything at camp did. Then he shared some of the things older staff had experienced. My laughter stopped. That night, a friend and I squeezed into the same narrow bunk because neither of us wanted to sleep alone. We did not understand that we were only beginning to collect stories of our own. The building that unsettled me most was called Day Camp. It had once been a private house before the camp existed. It was the only two-story building on the property. Large windows filled the main room with beautiful evening light. There was an old kitchen. Upstairs, an attic-like room served as an indoor activity space during bad weather. Day camp sat farther from the main camp than almost any other building. You reached it through woods on narrow, rocky paths. From inside, you often could not hear anyone else. That was remarkable because the camp could contain hundreds of loud children. Day camp always felt wrong to me. I cannot explain it better than that. My body tightened the moment I entered. I felt pressure against my skin. Every time I turned my back to an empty room, I had the sensation that many silent people were watching. The closest cabins belonged to the boys' village. At night, unless a light was on, Day camp nearly disappeared into the trees. The dark wood walls blended with the forest. The building normally closed after the youngest day campers went home. Staff checked every room, turned off lights, locked doors, secured the padlock. Yet every summer, counselors from the boys' cabins told the same story. Late at night, after campers were asleep, someone would notice a light glowing inside day camp. Sometimes the counselor who had personally closed the building that afternoon was the one who saw it. There was no reason for the light to be on. Still, someone had to walk through the dark woods and turn it off. Counselors took turns doing it. Almost everyone returned, saying they never wanted to make that walk again. My strongest personal experience happened during a missing camper drill. Every year, staff practiced what to do if a frightened child disappeared. One counselor played the role of the missing camper. Everyone else searched. Camp was divided into sections. Senior staff carried radios. Counselors checked cabins, buildings, trails, fields, under structures, anywhere a scared child might hide. Directors sometimes changed locks or moved objects to make the drill more realistic. That year, I was assigned one area, day camp, alone. The moment I heard the assignment, dread settled over me. Part of me considered pretending to search. I thought about walking halfway there, waiting, then reporting the building clear. I could not do that. The drill existed for a reason. So I went. I unlocked day camp, stepped inside, called the name of the counselor pretending to be missing. The floorboards creaked beneath me. The entire building felt unnaturally quiet. The sun was setting. Warm orange light entered through the windows. Compared with the busy center of camp, the silence felt impossible. I could not hear other counselors shouting, could not hear radios, nothing. I checked each room, every corner. All the while, I imagined the figures from my nightmares, the footsteps people heard on gravel, the voices in darkness, the unseen presence that made grown counselors run back to their cabins. Nothing appeared. The building was empty. I felt enormous relief. I locked the door behind me, then walked past the external cellar doors beneath day camp. They were heavy, secured by a padlock. I shook them to confirm. Locked. I had already been told I did not need to search the cellar. So I continued through the surrounding woods. I found nothing, reported my area clear, then received instructions to keep checking until the missing camper was found. I slowly made my way back. By then, I assumed the missing counselor was probably somewhere far across camp. As day camp came into view through the trees, I stopped. The cellar doors were open, both of them, wide open. Yellow light glowed from below. The evening had become dark enough that the light spilled dramatically onto the ground. The surrounding forest looked even blacker by comparison. I had worked at camp for years. I had never seen those cellar doors open. I did not even know there was a working light inside. I stood frozen, then called the missing counselor's camp name. Vren? No answer. Nothing moved. I walked closer. My body felt cold. I reached the top of the cellar stairs and looked down. One bare bulb illuminated several rotten wooden steps, old stone walls, a dirt floor, Nothing else. No furniture. No person. Just an empty cellar. Then my radio suddenly crackled. The missing camper had been found. The sound nearly made me fall backward. I landed in the grass. For a moment, I simply stared at the open cellar. Then I ran. When I returned to the main part of camp, another counselor named Nova was already there. She looked terrified. She had her own story. During the drill, Nova passed a maintenance shed secured with a padlock. That building was not part of the search area. As she walked by, the door began shaking violently. Not lightly. Not from wind. It slammed repeatedly against the padlock. Nova assumed the missing counselor had somehow been locked inside as part of the drill. She found another staff member buckle and got the key. They opened the shed. Nobody was inside. The maintenance worker, Finch, had not even been at camp that day. There was no explanation for how anyone could have entered. Nova could barely speak while telling us. Then I shared what happened at day camp. The older staff listened. They were disturbed, but not shocked. I asked whether anyone had opened the cellar as part of the drill. They said no. The program director, Haven, confirmed that Wren had been hiding near the pond, nowhere near day camp, nowhere near the maintenance shed. There was no practical explanation connecting either incident to the drill. That night, another counselor and I returned to day camp. We closed the cellar doors, reattached the padlock. As far as I know, nobody had any reason to open them again. Day camp remained my weak spot. Later, when I became a program specialist, one group chose the building as our meeting place. I was not thrilled. Fortunately, I had a trusted co-worker named Oracle with me. Oracle took paranormal experiences seriously. He knew a lot about folklore and respectful ways of approaching places people believed were haunted. He told me my instincts about day camp were probably not wrong, but he also believed strange energy existed throughout the entire property. He did not think day camp was uniquely dangerous. That helped. I made sure Oracle was nearby whenever possible. By the end of the season, I could almost relax inside. It felt as though whatever presence I had always sensed there had stopped focusing on me. Maybe that sounds ridiculous. I understand if it does. But after enough summers at that camp, you learn to stop demanding an explanation for everything. I have not told even half the stories I know. Fortunately, I never believed whatever shared that property wanted to physically hurt us. The strange events felt more like reminders. Footsteps, lights, doors, voices, things appearing where they should not, as though the past wanted to remain part of the camp. The property had generations of history. Even my grandfather had attended as a child. Thousands of people had laughed there, cried there, grown up there, returned years later. Maybe places hold memory in ways we do not understand. The deep green woods, old buildings, ruins, trails, hidden rooms, stories passed between counselors. All of it became part of the identity of camp. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, anyone who spends enough time in a place like that learns respect, not fear, respect. Another memory comes from a very different kind of camp. I have type 1 diabetes. When I was a very young child, my mother enrolled me in a daytime diabetes camp. She would drop me off in the morning and pick me up later. The camp was supposed to teach children like me that having diabetes did not mean we could not enjoy normal activities. We fished, played games, did crafts, and went swimming. Swimming is the activity I remember most clearly. Not because of the pool itself, because of one teenage male counselor. I do not remember his real name. I will call him Colton. Colton had a split tongue. Even as a little kid, I thought that made him memorable. But what I remember more is the way he looked at me. Whenever I wore my swimsuit before swimming, his attention made me uncomfortable. He stared too long. He made comments about how good I looked. Sometimes he winked. I was only a small child. I did not understand everything about why his behavior felt wrong. I only knew that it did. Colton also tried to convince me to go places with him where other people were not around. Thankfully, I was shy and cautious. I did not like going anywhere with adults unless I already trusted them. So I usually refused. One day, while my group was swimming, a counselor told me it was time to get out. My blood sugar was dropping. When my blood sugar gets low, I can become stubborn and irritable. I refused. The next thing I clearly remember is waking in the infirmary. I had lost consciousness in the pool. The lifeguard pulled me out and performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I was lucky. When I later walked through camp, I saw Colton. He asked a disturbing question about whether the lifeguard had used mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Then he made an inappropriate comment about the idea. Even as a child, I knew something about the conversation was deeply wrong. When my mother picked me up, I told her I did not want to return. I said I was homesick. That was not the real reason. The truth was that Colton frightened me, but I believed that if I told my mother exactly what had happened, she might believe an older counselor instead of a little kid. So I lied. Years later, when I was older, I finally told her. She apologized. She asked why I had never said anything. I told her the truth. I had been afraid nobody would believe me. I do not know whether Colton remembers how he behaved. I do not know what happened to him afterward. I can only hope no other child was ever placed in a dangerous situation around him. What stays with me most is not only what he did, it is how early I had already learned to doubt whether an adult would take my discomfort seriously. Children should never have to make that calculation. Another camping memory belongs to me and my best friend. We had known each other since we were toddlers. We grew up on the same street. Our families were close. We had endless stories together. One of the scariest happened when we were about 8. My best friend Riley invited me to go camping with her family at a local campground. I desperately wanted to get out of my house for the weekend, so I went. After we arrived, Riley and I decided it would be funny to hide in bushes and jump out at people walking past. We were children. It seemed hilarious. We surprised a few campers. Some jumped, some laughed. Most thought we were cute and kept walking. Then we jumped out at one man. He did not startle. He simply looked at us and smiled. The smile immediately made me uncomfortable. It was not warm. It was not the amused smile adults usually give children. It felt wrong. The man appeared to be in his late 40s. Tall, average build. He smelled strongly of cigarettes and whiskey. He stared at both of us for a long moment. Then he said we should not scare people like that. He called us naughty. The way he said it made my skin crawl. Riley grabbed my arm. She apologized quickly. Then we ran. The rest of that night passed without anything else happening. The next day seemed normal too. Later, near sunset, Riley and I were running around the campground. We heard someone call from up a hill. Yoo-hoo. Without thinking, I called back. Yoo-hoo. Then, someone appeared. It was the same man. This time, I did not feel immediate panic. I was in a good mood. It was daylight fading into evening. The campground felt full of people. The man walked toward us. He asked where our parents were. Riley answered honestly. At the campsite. The man's smile returned. He said it was getting dark, then offered to walk us back. We told him no. Our campsite was far away. Then he said he had 2 children. He said they had bicycles we could borrow. All we had to do was follow him to his campsite. I felt nervous. But I was 8 years old. I also did not want to be rude. Children are often taught to be polite before they are taught to trust discomfort. So I agreed. Riley and I followed. The man kept looking back at us, always smiling. We reached his campsite quickly. There were no children, no bicycles, nothing that supported his story. That was the moment my fear became real. He told us to wait outside his trailer while he went inside to get something. I looked at Riley. I whispered that we needed to hide. We were too far from our parents to outrun an adult all the way back. So we ran into the bushes. We crouched low, waited. A short time later, the trailer door opened. The man stepped outside. He was not carrying bicycles. He was holding duct tape. Even as a child, I understood that duct tape in his hands meant danger. My parents had warned me about strangers. I had watched crime programs with my father. I knew enough to understand that people sometimes use tape to restrain victims. I started panicking. Then I saw the man's expression change. The smile disappeared. He looked furious. He searched around the trailer. At one point, he looked almost directly toward where Riley and I were hiding. He did not see us. After searching for a while, he went back inside. The moment he disappeared, Riley and I ran. We did not stop until we reached our family. We were terrified, but we did not tell our parents. I do not fully understand why. Maybe we were afraid of getting in trouble for following him. Maybe we were ashamed that we had trusted him. Maybe we simply wanted to pretend it had not happened. We went home after the camping trip. For years, I barely spoke about it, but the memory stayed. So did the nightmares. Nothing else came from the experience. No police report, no investigation, no answer about who the man was. I sometimes think about how close we came to entering that trailer. We had followed him because we did not want to hurt a stranger's feelings. That lesson has stayed with me. Politeness should never be more important than safety. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to trust the feeling that tells you something is wrong. The last story was my first real family camping trip. It was also the trip that convinced me camping was not for me. I was 16. My mother, sister, and little brother planned to camp with my aunt, uncle, and 2 cousins. Our family had very little camping experience. My aunt and uncle had gone many times. The first day was surprisingly fun. I enjoyed myself much more than I expected. Later, everyone began settling down for the night. My cousins, my sister, and I were inside our tent. We were talking quietly and trying to get comfortable. Then we heard footsteps. Someone was walking around the tent. At first, we assumed it was family. Then we noticed the person was dragging or tapping something along the outside fabric. A stick, maybe. The sound moved around us, slowly circling. My sister reached toward the tent wall. At one point, through the fabric, she felt what seemed to be a person's leg. That made all of us sit up. We started asking who could possibly be outside. It was not my mother. We knew the sound of her breathing. It was not my little brother. The footsteps belonged to an adult. One cousin suggested it was probably their father. Our uncle loved jokes, especially nighttime pranks. That explanation made sense. For a moment, we relaxed. Then we looked through the small tent window. From there, we could see the campground road. Our aunt and uncle were walking back from the restrooms. Together, far from the tent. The truth hit all of us at once. The person circling our tent was not family. A complete stranger had been standing inches away. Only a thin layer of fabric separated us. We called out to our aunt and uncle as they approached. We told them what had happened. The footsteps stopped. Whoever had been outside apparently disappeared when adults came near. My cousins and sister remained frightened. I was so exhausted that I barely processed the seriousness of it. The rest of the trip passed without another incident. The most frustrating part came afterward. Nobody really believed us. Our relatives joked. They said we were paranoid. They knew we loved creepy stories, conspiracy theories, urban legends. So they assumed our imaginations had taken over. But all 4 of us heard the footsteps. We felt the person touching the tent. We saw our aunt and uncle away from the campsite at the same time. Someone had been there. I still wonder who. What did they want? Were they only trying to scare us? Were they intoxicated? Were they dangerous? I will never know. What bothers me most is thinking about what might have happened if our aunt and uncle had not returned when they did. 4 teenage girls inside a tent would have had almost no protection. That uncertainty stayed with me. I have never felt comfortable camping since. When I look back across all these stories, the details are different. A person moving through the dark outside a campsite. A stranger with a camera across a river. A hidden pit built by poachers. A child witnessing violence and being ignored. A hunter firing without knowing what was behind the brush. A brother found dead beside a campfire. A summer camp filled with unexplained footsteps and open doors. A counselor whose attention made a child feel unsafe. A stranger offering bicycles that did not exist. Footsteps circling a tent. Some of these stories have explanations. Some do not. Some are about human cruelty. Some are about accidents. Some may be about things we do not understand. But all of them say something about the same basic truth. The wilderness is beautiful because it removes so much of the noise of ordinary life. It gives us silence, distance, freedom. But that same isolation changes the rules. When you are far from roads, phones, hospitals, or other people. Small decisions carry more weight. Leaving too late, walking alone, ignoring weather, following a stranger because you do not want to seem rude, assuming every gunshot is far away, assuming the person outside your tent is family, assuming the woods are empty because you cannot see anyone. Preparedness is not paranoia. Listening to your instincts is not weakness. And asking for help is never something to be ashamed of. One of the strongest lessons in these stories comes from the child who witnessed a killing. He did exactly what a child should do. He ran home. He told adults. The adults failed him. For years, he carried guilt that never belonged to him. It took one loving grandfather to help him understand the difference between responsibility and blame. That matters far beyond camping. Sometimes we spend years punishing ourselves for decisions other people made. We think we should have been stronger, louder, smarter, older, more prepared. But we can only act with the knowledge and power we had in that moment. A child cannot be expected to investigate a murder. A frightened camper cannot be expected to know exactly who is walking outside the firelight. A young girl should not have to risk politeness when an adult makes her feel unsafe. A teenager should not have to prove discomfort before being believed. Kindness also matters in these stories. Not the kind of kindness that means ignoring danger. Real kindness includes protection. It means believing someone when they say something feels wrong. It means listening before laughing. It means teaching children that they are allowed to say no to adults. It means checking on the person who seems frightened instead of assuming they are dramatic. It means being careful with fire, weapons, trails, weather, and other people because our choices can affect lives we may never know. The hunter who may have fired into the brush without identifying a target could have destroyed an entire family. The person who dug a hidden pit in the woods may never have imagined a hiker falling into it during a storm. The adults who dismissed a child's report allowed a mystery to remain buried for years. Choices have consequences, even when we never intended the outcome. That does not mean we should live afraid. Fear is not the lesson. Awareness is. The outdoors should still be a place where people find peace, where children learn confidence, where families build memories, where people like the neglected boy in the forest discover something beautiful enough to hold on to until life gets better. Nature can be dangerous. It can also save people. For one child, the woods were an escape from a broken home. Later, with a loving grandfather, those same woods became an education. Eventually, they became a career. The place that once helped him survive became the thing that gave his life direction. That is why painful memories do not have to own the future. We can carry the lesson without carrying the fear forever. Forgiveness works the same way. Forgiveness does not mean pretending nothing happened. It does not mean trusting someone who has proven unsafe. It does not mean refusing consequences. Sometimes forgiveness simply means putting down guilt that was never yours. It means accepting that you cannot change what happened in the woods, beside the river, around the campfire, or inside the tent. You can only decide what you do with the memory now. Maybe you become more careful. Maybe you teach your children differently. Maybe you believe the next person who comes to you afraid. Maybe you call an old friend. Maybe you finally tell a story you have carried alone for years. Responsibility is not about controlling everything. Nobody can control every stranger, storm, accident, or unexplained sound. Responsibility is about the choices that are actually ours. Tell someone where you are going. Carry light. Carry water. Know the route. Respect weather. Do not wander into places you are not prepared to leave. Do not point a weapon at movement you have not clearly identified. Do not teach children that obedience is more important than instinct. Do not laugh when someone says they are scared. And when you make a mistake, own it. Learn. Do better. The people we become are shaped not only by what happens to us, but by what we choose afterward. The young backpacker returned home. The child by the river escaped. The injured hiker survived the flooded pit. The neglected boy found a grandfather who loved him. The wounded brother grew up. The family grieving a death kept searching for truth. Counselors returned to a mysterious camp and learned respect instead of panic. A child who once stayed silent finally told her mother what had made her uncomfortable. 2 little girls escaped a stranger before entering his trailer. 4 teenagers inside a tent made it through the night. Survival does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it is running, sometimes hiding, sometimes staying still until sunrise, sometimes telling the truth years later, sometimes simply trusting the quiet voice inside you that says something is wrong. If you spend time outdoors, respect the place you enter. Leave it cleaner than you found it. Do not turn hidden trails into noisy attractions. Do not damage old sites. Do not assume isolation means you are alone. Prepare carefully, but also remember why people go outside in the first place. To breathe, to think, to reconnect, to remember that the world is bigger than the problems waiting at home. Some of the best memories of a lifetime can happen beneath trees. So can some of the worst. Wisdom is knowing that both things can be true. There is one more reason these stories stay with people. They remind us how quickly confidence can change. At the beginning of a trip, people often feel capable. The backpack is packed, the route is planned, the fire is warm, the family is nearby, the tent is standing, everything feels under control. Then one small thing changes. A rock lands beside the fire. A camera clicks from across a river. The ground disappears beneath your feet. A gunshot breaks the quiet. A person who should be asleep does not come back to the tent. A locked door is suddenly open. A stranger smiles in a way that makes a child want to step backward. A set of footsteps circles fabric that suddenly feels far too thin. The world does not always give us a long warning before it becomes dangerous. That is why instinct matters. Instinct is not magic. It is not always correct. But sometimes the body notices a pattern before the mind can explain it. A tone of voice, the way someone stands too close, the way a person keeps watching, the absence of children at a campsite where a man claimed children were waiting, the silence that feels wrong, the object that was beside you before sleep and is suddenly somewhere else. People often talk themselves out of fear because they do not want to look foolish. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I am overreacting. Maybe I will offend someone. Maybe everyone will laugh. Those thoughts can be understandable. They can also keep people in dangerous situations longer than they should stay. There is nothing shameful about creating distance from something that feels wrong. You do not owe a stranger access to you. You do not owe anyone an explanation for leaving. You do not have to wait until you can prove danger before choosing safety. That lesson matters especially for children. Adults sometimes teach children to obey automatically. Say hello, give a hug, be polite. Do not embarrass anyone. Respect adults. Those lessons can be well-intentioned. But children also need another lesson. Your body belongs to you. You can say no. You can walk away. You can tell someone when an adult makes you uncomfortable. You will not be punished for asking for help. And if the first adult does not believe you, tell another. The little girl at diabetes camp did not tell her mother the truth because she had already learned something heartbreaking. She believed an adult's word might carry more weight than hers. Years later, when she finally spoke, her mother asked why she had stayed silent. The answer was simple: fear. Not only fear of the counselor, fear of disbelief. That is a responsibility adults should take seriously. When a child shares something uncomfortable, the first response can shape whether that child ever speaks again. Listen, stay calm, ask gentle questions. Do not shame. Do not immediately explain the behavior away. A child may not have perfect language. They may not understand what happened. They may remember only the feeling. That feeling still deserves attention. The same idea applies to adults. People who survive frightening situations often tell stories in imperfect ways. Memory under stress is complicated. Some details become incredibly sharp. Others disappear. A person may remember the smell of coffee, wet earth, smoke, pine trees, or a stranger's jacket. They may forget what direction they ran. They may remember one sentence perfectly and be unsure what happened immediately before it. That does not automatically make the story false. Fear does strange things to memory. So does grief. So does shock. The brother who found Wyatt near the fire reacted by becoming practical. He called for help, broke down camp, thought about telling his mother. Cole reacted by collapsing and crying. Both were grieving. Later, suspicion grew because grief needed somewhere to go. That is another painful truth. When there are no clear answers, families sometimes turn questions toward one another. Why did you not hear anything? Why did you not wake up? Why were there bruises? Why did you act so calm? Why did you act so emotional? Why were you drinking? Why did you not stop him? Questions can become accusations before facts exist. The need for truth is understandable, but grief can destroy more than the original loss if people allow suspicion to become certainty without evidence. Searching for answers is not wrong. Neither is protecting a family from unnecessary blame while the truth remains unknown. Both things can exist together. Love and doubt, hope and fear, the desire to forgive and the need to understand. Sometimes life does not give us a clean ending. The backpacker never learned who moved the flashlight. The family in Maryland never found the man with the camera. The injured hiker never knew who built the hidden trap. The hunter who shot Bryce was never definitively identified. The circumstances of Wyatt's death left questions. The summer camp never produced a scientific explanation for every light, footstep, open door, or shaking lock. The 4 girls in the tent never learned who circled them. Unanswered questions can be uncomfortable. Human beings like endings. We want a name, a motive, a reason, a final scene where everything makes sense. Real life does not always provide that. Sometimes the healthiest thing we can do is accept the difference between what we know and what we fear. What we know matters. What we suspect should remain a suspicion until evidence changes it. That discipline protects us from becoming unfair while trying to understand something frightening. It also teaches responsibility. Responsibility is one of the strongest threads running through these stories. The young backpacker chose to go alone after his friend cancelled. That decision did not make him responsible for being stalked, but it taught him to think differently about timing, isolation, communication, and backup plans. The child near the river was not responsible for the threatening stranger, but the experience taught the family to lock doors and take unfamiliar people seriously. The hiker did not create the illegal trap, but afterward, he learned to watch the ground and respect how quickly an ordinary trail can become a rescue situation. The neglected child was not responsible for solving a killing. He did the responsible thing by telling adults. The adults failed. Years later, speaking to police allowed him to release guilt that never belonged to him. Bryce and his brother were not responsible for a careless hunter firing into brush, but their family's experience changed the way they camped. They chose places with more oversight, more people, a different kind of safety. Responsibility is not the same as blame. That distinction matters. Blame asks, whose fault is this? Responsibility asks, what can I do now? Sometimes we cannot undo the first question, but we can still answer the second. That is where healing often begins. Grandpa Elias understood that. He did not tell the child to forget. He did not say the murder did not matter. He did not pretend the parents had done their best. He simply separated the child's burden from the adult's failure. You told them. They chose not to act. Now tell the police. Then let the responsibility move where it belongs. That was kindness with structure, not empty comfort, not just, everything will be okay. He gave the young man a practical way forward. Then he gave him permission to stop carrying what was not his. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do for someone is help them understand what belongs in their hands and what does not. Love can change a life that way. Grandpa Elias did not need a grand speech. He asked what the boy liked. He listened. He shared his own love of camping. He took him hiking. He taught him. He stayed. That steady care changed the direction of an entire life. A neglected child became an adult whose work protects wild places. That transformation did not happen because the past disappeared. It happened because one good adult became stronger than the damage left by several harmful ones. That is hopeful. It means kindness does not have to be dramatic to matter. You may never know when a simple act becomes the memory someone carries for decades. Listening, believing, inviting, teaching, calling, showing up, walking beside someone on a trail, making sure they get home. Those things sound ordinary. They are often the foundation of a life. Forgiveness can grow from the same place. Some people hear the word forgiveness and think it means removing accountability. It does not. You can forgive someone and still set boundaries. You can forgive and still report what happened. You can forgive and still decide never to return. You can forgive yourself without pretending every decision you made was perfect. You can forgive your younger self for being scared, for staying silent, for following someone you should not have followed, for trusting the wrong person, for not knowing what you know now. We are often cruelest to the earlier versions of ourselves. We look backward with adult knowledge and ask why a child did not act like an adult. Why did you not run sooner? Why did you not speak? Why did you go alone? Why did you believe them? Why did you freeze? Because you were who you were in that moment. With the information you had, with the fear you felt, with the choices you could see. Growth means learning without turning that learning into punishment. It means saying, I understand now. Next time, I will choose differently. That is enough. And sometimes, there will be no next time. Sometimes the lesson is carried forward for someone else. A parent teaches a child not to enter a stranger's trailer. A hiker tells friends to leave a route plan behind. A hunter teaches another hunter never to fire at movement. A counselor listens when a child says someone makes them uncomfortable. A family takes strange footsteps around a tent seriously. A camp teaches staff to check locks in pairs. A survivor tells a story. Someone listening recognizes a warning sign. That is how experience becomes useful instead of only painful. There is also a lesson about humility in the outdoors. Nature does not care how experienced we think we are. A skilled backpacker can still be caught in darkness. A careful hiker can still fall into a hidden hole. A family tradition can still meet an unpredictable accident. A familiar camp can still contain places that feel unknown. Experience helps. Preparation helps. Neither gives total control. Humility keeps experienced people alive because it allows them to say, I might be wrong. The weather might change. The trail may be harder. The river may be deeper. The light may disappear sooner. I may need more water. I may need to turn back. Turning back is not failure. Changing plans is not weakness. Calling for help is not embarrassment. A safe return is always more important than proving toughness. That is especially important for young people who sometimes feel pressure to prove bravery. Bravery is not walking deeper into danger because someone might call you scared. Bravery can be leaving. Bravery can be refusing. Bravery can be telling an adult. Bravery can be admitting you are lost. Bravery can be staying still when panic tells you to run blindly. Bravery can be waiting beside an injured person. Bravery can be returning years later to tell the truth. The stories from the mysterious summer camp add another kind of lesson. Not everything unfamiliar has to become an enemy. Some strange things may have ordinary explanations. The running child on the field was a shadow. The woman in white was a flag moving in moonlight. Those explanations did not make the stories foolish. They showed why perspective matters. Fear fills gaps quickly. Once we understand the light, the angle, the wind, the illusion changes. That is healthy skepticism. But skepticism does not require arrogance. There were still events the counselors could not explain. Open locks, lights inside secured buildings, doors moving violently, footsteps, voices. Whether those events were paranormal, mechanical, human, or misunderstood, the healthiest response was not panic. It was attention, respect, curiosity. The counselor named Flint modeled that well. He explained what he could. He did not mock fear. Then he admitted there were things he could not explain. That balance is valuable everywhere. Explain what evidence can explain. Leave room for uncertainty where evidence ends. Do not invent certainty just because uncertainty feels uncomfortable. In the end, living well requires that same balance. Be cautious without becoming afraid of everything. Be kind without ignoring danger. Forgive without abandoning boundaries. Trust people without handing strangers control. Respect the unknown without allowing imagination to replace evidence. Accept responsibility without carrying blame that belongs to someone else. And when you have the chance to make someone feel safer, take it. You may be the aunt who decides to walk into the woods with a child who normally goes alone. You may be the friend who hikes back for rescuers. You may be the father who runs toward an injured son. You may be the grandfather who finally listens. You may be the counselor who believes a frightened child. You may be the person whose presence causes a stranger outside a tent to disappear. You may never realize what your presence prevented. That is one of the quiet truths of life. We notice disasters. We rarely notice the disasters that never happened because someone showed up at the right moment. So show up for your friends, for your children, for the person who tells you something strange happened, for yourself. Take fear seriously enough to investigate it, but not so seriously that it controls your entire life. Take the lesson, leave the poison, carry the wisdom forward. If these stories stayed with you, share them with someone who loves camping, hiking, or spending time far from the city. Not to frighten them away from the outdoors, to remind them to respect it. And if you have your own story, tell it. Stories can warn people. They can help someone recognize danger sooner. They can make another person feel less alone. Sometimes a story that frightened you for years becomes the exact story that helps somebody else make a better choice. Subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to hear more stories like these. And wherever your next trail leads, stay aware. Trust your instincts. Take care of the people beside you and come home with nothing left behind except footprints and memories.